everybody. So I don't know if we're starting on time or on French time, but we'll go ahead and get running and see how much we can squeeze into 25 minutes. So welcome to the session for today. We are talking about Talk Dev to Me, which is all about coding basics for admins. So just a quick intro to myself. I am a certified instructor with Salesforce with Trailhead Academy. And I am an architect. I do freelance work myself, and I'm 16 times certified. I am a marketing champion. I recently co-founded Automation Dreaming, so that was just a couple weeks ago, and still running the high from that one. And then a little bit about me personally. I'm a huge bookworm, so I love to read. I have a huge bookshelf of books that are on the list. And I like to go hiking and bike riding when I have free time. So around my area, I live in Clermont-Ferrand, so actually in France, about 3.5 hours south of here. And then I was originally from the US, so American expat. Been here for 12 years now, so I think I can officially say. And I am a mom of 3, so that's my youngest one there. He's much bigger than that right now and has grown quite a bit. But yeah, that's possibly the thing that keeps me the busiest out of all of them. So today, I figured that I would do a session really about the gap in between the admins and all of these great declarative tools that we have. We have Flow coming out. It's replacing Process Builder. It's replacing Workflow. But then we have all of these dev tools as well. And it's a little bit about, well, where's that gap? Where's that overlap in between the two? And that's kind of what we're going to be addressing today. So when I talk to people about development, talk about the slippery slope to coding a lot, because I was not a developer. I was not technical. I was an English teacher in a past life. So this is a long way from my comfort zone. And I became a certified admin only in 2018, so not that long ago. And came in from the core side, had a little segue into the marketing cloud world, and then started coding off the back of it. And I tell my story because I think that it's really easy for admins to start to find the use cases for coding and start going down that slippery slope. So just to show you that it is a slippery slope, you start with the basics, you start with like little things, and then it goes pretty quickly from there. So my story, I did Apex Academy. A little bit crazy, during maternity leave, I decided that I would do Apex Academy and start to learn coding. Because, you know, a new baby isn't enough at home. You need something else to keep you busy. And after that, I came back to work after maternity leave. And one of my colleagues asked me, well, I want to know if this is possible. I want to be able to automatically convert a lead. That seems like something in Salesforce that should be available to us. But at the time, the flow wasn't as developed as it was, and the only way to do so was with a trigger. So it turned into my very first Apex trigger. It was, yes, oh yeah, David Liu said that's possible in Apex Academy, so I know it's possible. Let's go ahead and try it. And that was my very first foray into coding. And I'd say that it's very hard to go that way, so don't necessarily follow my path directly. But then I did Rad Women Code, and it really did help to explain the basics of coding. So I'll let you all in on a little secret here. Flowing is coding. So if you're writing flows already, if you're an administrator writing flows, you're already doing some of the coding basics. Really, we say that the flow code, the flow tool, is abstracting our code for us. So it's making it easier to do the point and click work, but underlining, you're actually using the coding. And that's what we're going to start off with. So I am kind of jumping off the deep end here, and I know we only have 25 minutes, but I just wanted to kind of show you the art of the possible in the coding world. So if you're looking to get started, the object-oriented programming, basically Apex Flow, it's all using object-oriented programming language. And the nice thing about this is that it's universal. There's a ton of free code camps out there that give great intros to object-oriented programming. And what this comes into in the Salesforce world for us is that these are all of the things that we're using anyway in the system. Those records that we're creating, the different objects that we're creating, the collections that we're creating, those collection variables in Flow, all of that is based off of object-oriented programming. And then when you make a field, your different types of fields, you pick a data type for them. Well, that's object-oriented programming principles. It all comes back to our data types. So it sounds a little different between the two sometimes when we're in the declarative tools, we call it a checkbox. It's a nice checkbox. We can tick it yes or no, true or false. Well, in coding, we call that a Boolean. So there are a lot of things where it's just parallels in between what you're already doing. And I'd say that that's kind of the sweet spot that we can be at and start to go down that slippery slope. Some other things that come from the coding world that we can use in flows as well is knowing things like variables and constants. So we get thrown into this world of variables where actually in flow, a lot of it's already created for us. But every once in a while, we have to create a variable on our own in the Flow Builder tool. So a variable is just going to be basically an envelope where we can throw some sort of value into it, and it can change as often as it needs to. As we're going through the flow, as we're going through the code, it can change as often as we need. And then on the other side of that, we have what we call a constant. And a constant is something that is like the word. It stays the same. It's constant the whole time through. And these are really important for us because when we're building out a flow, we need to think through, okay, is this something that I'm going to be reusing? Like in a loop, I want to use the same thing over and over again. That's a good candidate for a variable. Whereas a constant is one that I don't see used quite as often, but I've started to use it and it works really well. So when you're writing those flows that you want to send an email from the same email address all over the flow, and that email might one day down the road, your client or organization might decide to change it. Well, then you have to go into each and every one of your actions in the flow and update that email. If you put it into a constant in the flow and you create that constant first, you update it once, it updates everywhere. So that's a really good use case for the constant and just making your life easier down the road because we're thinking about our future selves. How can we help our future self and make our lives easier? So throwing a little bit more of the coding principles at you, because like I said, this is kind of a crash course right now, so giving you a little bit of an idea of what's out there. Well, we have this thing called DML. We talk about DML, and we like to use these acronyms without explaining what they are or what they mean. DML is data manipulation language, and all it is pretty much those pink things that you see in the flow. So the nice thing about Flow Builder is that everything's color-coded. That means that we can start to use some of those color codes to recognize what it is that we're creating. So a DML is actually when we're creating a record, when we're updating, when we're deleting records. Those are all of our DML statements, we call them. We're going to see in a bit why this is important to us as declarative builders, why this is important to us as flow builders. And on the code side, this is what it looks like in Apex. It has a different name, but it's doing the same thing. When you create a record in Salesforce, you're inserting a record in Apex code. When you're updating a record, it's either an update or an upsert. Like in when we're doing data loading. So if you've done data loading before, you might know upsert a little bit better. And then we have 6 in total, so I've put them all here just so that you have a full picture. But we have delete, we have merge, and we have undelete too. And why this is important to us is, this is getting ahead of myself. I'm giving away one of my slides later on. But when we talk about governor limits, we know that we only have 150 DML statements that we can use in each transaction. And that's everything that goes on as soon as, for example, you save a record. When you save a record, everything that happens off the back of it, no matter how many flows that triggers, whether it triggers code or not, is one entire transaction. And it's really easy in Salesforce to start to create a lot of automation. We know we've been there before, we've gone into orgs, I'm sure, where we go into an org and we realize, oh, there's a lot of automation going in here, and our users are starting to complain. They're starting to say, well, Lightning's slow. Lightning is, yeah, not necessarily slow, but what's slowing it down is all of that automation that's running off of the back of when you're saving a record and everything that fires in that transaction. And then we bring our governor limits into it, and these are the limits that Salesforce imposes on us so that we play fair, so that we don't take up too many resources off of that server that we're all sharing, and they're guaranteeing us some fair play there. So we only have 150 of these DML statements. So if we're creating an opportunity, and then that opportunity is triggering a flow, Apex, other things happening off the back of it, and if we have a whole bunch of these little pink records, especially if you throw a loop in there and we start looping through and creating records in a loop, then we're going to hit that 150 pretty quickly. And that's why all of this is important to us at the end of the day. And the one that you're missing right now, you might have realized, is that we don't have all of our pink statements up there. We have Git records too. So SOCL is what we call it in the coding space. It's like SQL, so SQL, which is the universal coding language. But SOCL is a Salesforce object query language. And it basically brings SQL with some special Salesforce sauce there, and gives us access to all of that object-oriented programming part of it. So our objects, our records, everything that's coming with the Salesforce database. And we use SOCL when we update a record in certain use cases. So if you're updating a record and you're saying, I want to update a record that matches this criteria, you're using SOCL. And that's a harder one to differentiate because we saw it actually potentially hits 2 different governor limits. So now we're starting to get complex and complicated here. And then Git records is always going to be a SOCL statement. So with our synchronous SOCL, we only have 100 of those in our governor limits. So this is where it all starts to come into play here. And what it looks like on the coding side is our SOCL statement. So we can do a Git, or we can select the ID from the contact where there is an email address and get our data back that way. And this is where it's demo time, because I feel like that's all really high level and it's kind of hard to understand unless you actually see it. So what I've done is I put together a little use case here. This is based off of my London's Calling demo org, which actually I thought this was updated to French Touch Streaming branding, but it didn't stick. And I have all of our speakers in here, and I started to use the opportunities, actually it's in my other tab here, to track all of the speaker opportunities. So I have a pick list that says that the type is speaker on this particular opportunity. I have sponsorship in here too, but for all of our speakers, I have that on this particular session, this is going to be a speaker opportunity that I'm tracking. On all of my, so there we go, we've got it down here, the type is speaker. And then on our contact record that's related to it, I have this nice little text field called speaker message, and I'd like to broadcast some messages out to my speakers. Well, I can do that with a flow or with code, and that's just the use case that I gave for this one. So trying to think of something creative that might fit a couple of different areas and not just one industry or anything like that. And what I did on the back end is to show us both what it would look like in flow and then an anti-pattern as well, and what it would look like in code. So really, we can do the same thing in both, and we can use these principles in both as well. So for any of you who have done loops before, this might look familiar. If not, Jen Lee in Automation Champions blog has a really good blog, and this is where I got all of my stuff from. Because as admins, we'd like to say, like, oh, don't steal my work, don't recreate all of my work, that's mine. But in the developer world, one of the things I really liked when I started to develop was when you tell a developer that you stole their work, they say, oh, awesome, yeah, there we go, that's the reaction. That's awesome. There's no such thing as an original idea in the dev world. Everybody copies each other's stuff. So that's one of the nice differences about the spaces, too. So what we have here is we're getting all of the speaker opportunities, and then I'm going to loop through all of them. And we start to use some of these object-oriented programming principles. So I wanted to make this during the session, but I don't think 25 minutes is enough time to actually make it, so I've pre-created here. So we have a auto-launched flow just so that it's easy to demo. But ideally, this would be a record-triggered flow. And then we have a Git records where we're getting all of those opportunities. Oh, let's just come in and take a look at what this one is doing. We're getting all of those opportunities with a type of speaker. And we're saying that we want all of them. So what this is going to do is it actually creates a collection variable for us and sticks all of those opportunities into that variable. So this is where Flow is actually doing some of the coding for us. It's creating some of this for us. And we don't always have to think about creating variables ourselves. There are use cases for it, but we don't always have to think about it. And then in the code side, this is what it looks like on the code side. So we have a list here of speaker opportunities, and then we have that SOCL statement that we're doing. So the exact same thing on the coding side. And then this is where you actually have to start to create variables yourselves. So what I did before I created this loop, to loop through all of those opportunities and then update the speakers, was that I actually did create my variables in advance. I have a record variable called record contact speaker. Another thing that you'll get from the coding side as well is naming conventions. So code developers love good naming conventions, and actually works out really well for us as declarative, sometimes.
Let's say you prefer readable stuff. So it's
Yes.
not so much about the convention than to convey your meaning and intention.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that is actually one of the points that I did put in here was a lot of comments, and I know this is an idea on the idea exchange for Flow, and maybe one day we will get it, but being able to comment our Flow would be really, really nice. So naming conventions, commenting, and what we did here is we have that variable for the single record, and then we have our collection variable. And what we do in a loop is we use these assignments, and you'll notice that the assignments aren't pink. The assignments are not actually DML, and that's why we use them at the end of the day for a loop. So we have our not pink assignments. This one is doing all of our updates for us. So it's saying, well, take that current record that we're going through this loop. That's going to be the idea of this record that I'm looking at. And then I want to update it with my message. And I have a constant in here that's a message so that I can just go in and update that message whenever I want to. So that's going to be my use case for using a constant, is that I can update that speaker message as maybe my years change. I'm trying to get people to come back and speak again or something like that, whatever that broadcasted message might be. And then I go ahead, and this is where your collection comes in. So I take that single one record that I found, I've updated it, and I stick it into a collection. So I've got this nice big manila envelope, basically, and I'm sticking all of those records into my manila envelope. And I'm just keeping them there for right now. I'm not doing anything in the system. I'm not doing any updates in the database. And then I let that go, and I go through all of my records in the loop, and only after the last one do I use a pink variable. So this is our update records. And this is going to update all of the speaker records, so all of those contacts, with the message that I asked to broadcast. Now the anti-pattern for this, and we can go back and actually look at this. So this is what the code version is doing. And this is how I started to learn as well. I found it hard to find use cases to start to learn Apex, and I wanted to be able to practice myself. So I started to translate some things I was doing into code. So I am a beginner developer, so still I would say maybe beginner intermediate. I'm no way an advanced developer, so this might not be perfect, but we're looping through the opportunities. And we're going, well, for each of those opportunities that is in this GET, basically, this SOCL query that I got back, I am going to update the speaker message, and then I'm going to update them all at once at the end. And that's what we've been doing in the developer world for a while, and that's some of the best practices that we've developed. And that's what we need to try to translate into the flow side of things. So our anti-pattern here is going to be like this. And this is, I'll be the first to say that when I started doing flows, I did flows that looked like this, and they worked. They worked for what I was trying to do. They worked for a little while. I was working with smaller organizations. We didn't have a whole lot of records, and I was happy until the day that they got bigger. And then they had more records coming in, or they tried to do a data load all at once. And then they started to come to me saying, well, everything broke. Well, why did everything break? It's because I started to hit those governor limits that I didn't know about, because I was using declarative tools. So I thought, governor limits, that's a code thing. That doesn't touch me. And yeah, it does. So governor limits will find us. And what we're doing here is we're looping through all of the records, and each time we're using one of those pink variables. Well, remember what the pink actions are. There are DML. How many DML do we have? We've only got 150 of them. Well, that means as soon as I go through 150 records here, up 151, I get an error. And I get a governor limit error that looks really scary. It gets emailed to me and all of the other system admins that are signed up for Apex exception emails. So that's not particularly a good thing. So I have put these in here just because I wasn't sure that the demo was going to work, so to be fair. This is the flow that we've done. So this is the flow version and what it's translating into in code. So we've got that get, that is our SOCL. We're looping the loop, which is loops like a for loop in developer speak. We are assigning values to a single variable and then adding them to a collection. That came from our object-oriented programming that we started to talk about before. And then we have our DML update. For those of you taking pictures, this is the last one, so you can So this is our DML update at the end. And with this one, now in that one transaction, I only am using up one of my DMLs, and that makes it a whole lot more robust, a whole lot more scalable. So when I start to have an organization that grows, as we hope that all of our organizations do, then this flow will be able to grow with it. And this is the code version. So if anybody wants a snapshot of what that code looks like, here it is here. And there is a whole conversation, and I'll point you towards any of Melissa Shepard's videos that she's done on synchronous versus asynchronous, because that's another part of the dev world that definitely touches on flows. The decision about whether this should be actually synchronously happening off of our opportunity. Because what it comes down to is, our opportunity, more than likely, we're going to have some sort of integration that's bringing data into our opportunities. And then if we have all of the synchronous stuff happening off the back of it, and it errors, and we don't have error handling in there, then it breaks that whole integration too. So this is where we want to be careful about whether we even use synchronous, whether we use our record trigger flows in the first place, or is it actually something that can go into asynchronous mode and just be handled by the system when it's ready for it, and kind of decoupling that. So this comes into why it's so important in the first place. Oh, I know I'm getting up towards the end of time here. So why is this important? I already gave us a little bit of this and hinted at it, but DML are governor limits. We have DML, we have SOCL. In SOCL, if we do decide to go asynchronous, we get a little bit more that we can do because we're allowed to take up a little bit more of the server's resources because we're just doing it when those resources are available. So we've got 150 DML statements, 100 or 200 SOCL, depending on whether it's synchronous or asynchronous. And we have the anti-pattern. So this is what I did demo because the demo worked. Awesome. But this is what we want to do, where we have that one nice DML at the end here. This is what we don't want to do. So that nice big red X, don't put a DML statement, don't put a get either in your loop. It also comes into our before-after save. So I don't have time to do a full session on this one as much as I would love to. But we have the order of execution. That is actually my next couple of slides here. So this one I'll give full credit to Pavel. He just put out on LinkedIn the other day, really timely, a great diagram showing us the before and after saves. So we've got all of our before save flows, our before triggers here, and after save and after flows. But all of this is in flow. Our fast field updates, it used to be called before flows. So way back when they first came out with it, we had those in there, but now they're called fast field updates. And then our actions and related records are actually after flows. And it's knowing where these fire. Because things like a fast field updates, I don't actually need a DML statement in there. It just updates even if I just use an assignment. So little things like that you don't need that DML statement, and understanding why you might get the errors when you're trying to save your flows to, really helpful. And then yes, all of our resources as well. So I did put some things up here because I know I saw a couple questions coming in on the app already, and I had thought of those already, of how to get started, how to be able to code and to do a little bit a day. I saw that question coming in, not doing like a full course or anything. And it is just finding the use cases. So I know I have a dev work where I try to code things. That's where I did Visual Force. I did a nice PDF that renders in Visual Force, starting to do Apex and Flow and testing things out. And it's actually Johan, one of the CTAs out there, really amazing person himself. And he was one of the people who said, well, actually, we want to implement all of these crazy dev tools and try this out for ourselves, but sometimes it's not the right thing for our client. So when you get into those use cases, go ahead and recreate it in a dev org. And that way you get to practice, you get to have some fun, and you get to go down the slippery slope of coding yourselves. And you can start to even translate some of your flows into code, or just start to use some of the coding principles when you're thinking about flows. Because it really is just that mindset. When we're starting to think about our flows, when we're starting to think about what we would like that workflow to look like, it's remembering, well, what do I need to consider here? I can put a pink action, a DML statement in a loop. But I remember that session at French Touch Streaming, and she said I shouldn't. I don't know why, but I'll remember that and not do that anymore. So it's all of these little things, and there are a lot of anti-patterns. So we talk about anti-patterns a little bit more in the Salesforce ecosystem, and actually on the developer blog, there's a really good blog article that they pushed out, where it's all of these anti-patterns that really are cautionary tales. Like our cautionary whales out there telling us, well, you can do this, but you shouldn't, and here's why. And even if you're building for a smaller organization, a smaller company, building with scalability in mind, it just makes it less technical debt. I know that's another session that went on here today, but like less technical debt, your future self will thank you, and your future clients will. Also, Rad Women, if you qualify, it's an amazing program. And then there is SFDC 99, which is David Liu, and he even has Apex Academy on Pluralsight. Awesome resources to get started in code if you are curious. Even if you're not going to be writing code yourselves, it just helps with understanding, well, what's the system doing actually in the background? Because at the end of the day, it's a system, it's a database. We're starting to think like a computer, and that will help us to become better flowers. And of course, Trailhead. So there is Trailhead out there with some great information on it. And I know that we're at time, so I'll stick around for any questions if anybody does have them. But feel free to stay in touch. If you do have other questions, feel free to contact me. I'm most likely on either Twitter for now or LinkedIn. So feel free to message me. I'm always answering back, or as soon as I can, with 3 kids. And thank you so much for attending this session. It was great having you all here today. And any questions? Yeah.
I just have one question, because I saw the way you built a loop and then you had 2 assignments. So before I was doing it in a way like, first of all, I assign values to the temporary variable and then I add them to the collection. But then I was wondering like why we do have 2 assignment elements, and I started putting them in the same one, and to me it works. So I'm just wondering why.
I'd say it's something that I saw somewhere else. So typical developer copied somebody else's work. But I'd say it comes down to readability as well, because that's a lot of what we talk about in the developer space as well. Like you mentioned before, like commenting your code, it makes it a little bit more readable. So by having those 2 separate assignments, you're saying, well, in this one, I can very clearly label what I'm doing. And in this one, it's just an assignment that's sticking it into the collection. So it's making it very easy for somebody else to come in and see exactly what you're doing. Good question.
It's a trade-off, right?
Yeah.
No elements. So at the time you will make the trade-off between readability and number of elements.
Yes. If you're getting one of those crazy flows, then you can start to hit other issues as well. We do have other limits in there as well. So there's the 2,000 limit, because you can only go through a flow 2,000 times. But the Automation Dreaming keynote that just went out in November, I think I can officially publicly say this, that one is on the roadmap to go away. Yeah, we're all really excited about that one. So finally, one governor limit that we don't have to worry about. And that was one of the reasons why we started to code a lot more rather than using flow, is because as soon as you hit that limit, we had to go over to code, and it was the only way to handle it. Whereas that's really eliminating a barrier for us needing to write code in the first place.
I think also, like with the version history when you're saving flows,
Yeah.
I inherited 2 walls basically from other people, and one of them was a
Yeah, and that's an awesome call out too. It's almost a way of putting commenting in before we get the comments. Yeah, absolutely. Any other questions? Okay, well, I've officially overloaded everybody, I think. So I'll let you, now that you've had lunch, I'll let you all go and digest all of that. And feel free to reach out if you do have any questions later, because I know things bubble up sometimes. So.